Disc 7.
Chapter 10. On the following morning we were early astir, and as soon as breakfast was over, we went regularly to work with the bird-lime. The tough, adhesive mixture of caoutchouc oil and turpentine turned out well. The boys brought rods, which I smeared over and made them place among the upper branches, where the fruit was plentiful and the birds most congregated. The prodigious number of the pigeons, far beyond those of last year, reminded me that we had not then, as now, witnessed their arrival at their feeding places, but had seen only the last body of the season, a mere party of stragglers, compared to the masses which now weighed down the branches of all the trees in the neighborhood. The sweet acorns of the evergreen oaks were also patronized. Large flocks were there congregated, and from the state of the ground under the trees, it was evident that at night they roosted on the branches. Seeing this, I determined to make a raid upon them by torchlight, after the manner of the colonists in Virginia. Meantime, the bird-lime acted well. The pigeons alighting stuck fast. The more they fluttered and struggled, the more completely were they bedaubed with the tenacious mixture, and at length, with piteous cries, fell to the ground, bearing the sticks with them. The birds were then removed, fresh lime spread, and the snare set again. The boys quickly became able to carry on the work without my assistance, so leaving it to them, I went to prepare torches with pine wood and turpentine for the night attack. Jack presently brought a very pretty pigeon, unlike the rest, to show me, as he felt unwilling to kill it. On seeing that it must be one of our own European breed, which we wished to preserve until their numbers greatly increased, I took the trembling captive and gently cleaned its feet and wings with oil and ashes from the stiff, sticky mess with which it was bedaubed, placing it then in a wicker cage, and telling Jack to bring me any others like it which were caught. This he did, and we secured several pairs, greatly to my satisfaction, as having necessarily let them go free when we landed, they had become quite wild, and we derived no advantage from them, whereas now we would have a cot and pigeon pie whenever we liked. When evening drew on, we set out for the wood of sweet acorns, provided merely with long bamboo canes, torches, and canvas sacks. These weapons appeared very curious and insufficient to the children, but their use was speedily apparent, for darkness having come upon us almost before we reached the wood, I lighted the torches and perceived, as I expected, that every branch was thickly laden with ortolans and wild pigeons, who were roosting there in amazing numbers. Suddenly aroused by the glare of light, confusion prevailed among the terrified birds, who fluttered helplessly through the branches, dazzled and bewildered, and many falling, even before we began to use the sticks, were picked up and put in the bags. When we beat and struck the branches, it was as much as my wife and Franz could do to gather up the quantities of pigeons that soon lay on the ground. The sacks were speedily quite full. We turned homewards, and on reaching Falconhurst, put our booty in safety and gladly withdrew to rest. The following day was wholly occupied in plucking, boiling, roasting, and stewing, so that we could find time for nothing else. But next morning a great expedition to Woodlands was arranged, that measures might there be taken to prevent a repetition of the monkey invasion. I hoped, could I but catch the mischievous rascals at their work of destruction, to inflict upon them such a chastisement as would effectually make them shun the neighborhood of our farm for the future. My wife provided us with a good store of provisions, as we were likely to be absent several days, while she, with Franz and Turk, remained at home. I took with me abundance of specially prepared bird-lime, far stronger than that which we used for the pigeons, a number of short posts, plenty of string, and a supply of coconut shells and gourds. The buffalo carried all these things, and one or two of the boys besides. I myself bestrode the ass, and in due time we arrived at a convenient spot in the forest near Woodlands, well concealed by thick bushes and underwood, where we made a little encampment, pitching the small tent and tethering the animals. The dogs, too, were tied up, lest they should roam about and betray our presence. We found the cottage quite quiet and deserted, and I lost no time in preparing for the reception of visitors, hoping to be all ready for them and out of sight before they arrived. We drove the stakes lightly into the ground, so as to form an irregular paling round the house, winding string in and out in all directions between them, thus making a kind of labyrinth through which it would be impossible to pass without touching either the stakes or the cords. Everything was plentifully besmeared with bird-lime, and basins of the mixture were set in all directions, strewed with rice, maize, and other dainties for bait. Night came without any interruption to our proceedings, and all being then accomplished, we retired to rest beneath the shelter of our little tent. Very early in the morning we heard a confused noise, such as we knew betokened the approach of a large number of apes. We armed ourselves with strong clubs and cudgels, and holding the dogs in leash, made our way silently behind the thickets, till, ourselves unseen, we could command a view of all that went on. And strange indeed was the scene which ensued. The noise of rustling, crackling, and creaking among the branches, with horrid cries and shrieks and chattering, increased to a degree sufficient to make us perfectly giddy. And then out from the forest poured the whole disorderly rabble of monkeys, scrambling, springing, leaping from the trees, racing and tumbling across the grassy space towards the house, when, at once attracted by the novelties they saw, they made for the jars and bowls. They seemed innumerable, but the confused, rapid way in which they swarmed hither and thither made it difficult to judge accurately of their numbers. They dashed fearlessly through and over the palings in all directions, some rushing at the eatables, some scrambling onto the roof, where they commenced tugging at the wooden pegs with a view to forcing an entrance. Gradually, however, as they rambled over the place, all in turn became besmeared with our bird-lime on head, paws, back, or breast. The wretched predicament of the apes increased every instant. Some sat down, and with the most ludicrous gestures tried to clean themselves. Others were hopelessly entangled in stakes and cordage, which they trailed about after them, looking the picture of bewildered despair. Others, again, endeavored to help one another, and stuck fast together. The more they pulled and tugged and kicked, the worse became their plight. Many had the gourds and coconut shells lumbering and clattering about with them, their paws having been caught when they sought to obtain the rice or fruit we had put for bait. Most ridiculous of all was the condition of one old fellow who had found a calabash containing palm wine, and, eagerly drinking it, was immediately fitted with a mask, for the shell stuck to his forehead and whiskers, of course covering his eyes, and he blundered about, cutting the wildest capers in his efforts to get rid of the encumbrance. Numbers took to flight, but as we had spread bird-lime on several of the trees around, many apes found themselves fixed to or hanging from the branches, where they remained in woeful durance, struggling and shrieking horribly. The panic being now general, I loosed the 3 dogs, whose impatience had been almost uncontrollable, and who now rushed to the attack of the unfortunate monkeys, as though burning with zeal to execute justice upon desperate criminals. The place soon had the appearance of a ghastly battlefield, for we were obliged to do our part with the clubs and sticks till the din of howling, yelling, barking, in every conceivable tone of rage and pain, gave place to an awful silence, and we looked with a shudder on the shocking spectacle around us. At least 40 apes lay mangled and dead, and the boys began to be quite sad and downhearted, till I, fully sharing their feelings, hastened to turn their thoughts to active employment in removing and burying the slain, burning the stakes, cordage, bowls, everything concerned in the execution of our deadly stratagem. After that we betook ourselves to the task of restoring order to our dismantled cottage, and seeking for the scattered flock of sheep, goats, and poultry, we gradually collected them, hoping to settle them once more peacefully in their yards and sheds. While thus engaged, we repeatedly heard a sound as of something heavy falling from a tree. On going to look, we found 3 splendid birds caught on some of the limed sticks we had placed loose in the branches. 2 of these proved to be a variety of the blue Molucca pigeon. The third I assumed to be the Nicobar pigeon, having met with descriptions of its resplendent green, bronze, and steely blue plumage, and I was pleased to think of domesticating them and establishing them as first tenants of a suitable dwelling near the cave. "First tenants, father?" said Fritz. "Do you expect to catch more like these?" "Not exactly catch them. I mean to practice a secret art. Much can be done by magic, Fritz." Further explanation I declined to give. In a few days Woodlands was once more set in order, and everything settled and comfortable, so that we returned without further adventure to Falconhurst, where we were joyfully welcomed. Everyone agreed that we must go at once to Tentholm to make the proposed pigeon house in the rock. Several other things there also requiring our attention, we made arrangements for a prolonged stay. My plan for the pigeon house was to hollow out an ample space in the cliff facing towards Jackal River and close to our rocky home, fitting that up with partitions, perches, and nesting places, while a large wooden front was fitted onto the opening with entrance holes, slides or shutters, and a broad platform in front, where the birds could rest and walk about. When, after the work of a few weeks, we thought it was fit for habitation, I set the other children to work at some distance from our cavern, and summoning Fritz, "Now, my faithful assistant," said I, "it is time to conjure the new colonists to their settlement here." "Yes," I continued, laughing at his puzzled look, "I mean to play a regular pigeon dealer's trick. You must know such gentry are very ingenious, not only in keeping their own pigeons safe, but in adding to their numbers by attracting those of other people. All I want is some soft clay, aniseed, and salt, of which I will compound a mixture which our birds will like very much, and the smell of which will bring others to share it with them." "I can easily get you those things, father." "I shall want some oil of aniseed besides," said I, "to put on the pigeonholes, so that the birds' feathers may touch it as they pass in and out, and become scented with what will attract the wild pigeons. This I can obtain by pounding aniseed, and therefore bring me the mortar and some oil." When this was strongly impregnated with the aromatic oil from the seeds, for I did not purpose to distill it in regular style, I strained it through a cloth, pressing it strongly. The result answered my purpose, and the scent would certainly remain for some days. All my preparations being completed, the pigeons were installed in their new residence, and the slides closed. The European birds were by this time quite friendly with the 3 beautiful strangers, and when the other boys came home and scrambled up the ladder to peep in at a little pane of glass I had fixed in front, they saw them all contentedly picking up grain and pecking at the magic food, as Fritz called it, although he did not betray my secret arts to his brothers. Early on the 3rd morning I aroused Fritz and directed him to ascend the rope ladder and arrange a cord on the sliding door of the dovecot, by which it could be opened or closed from below. Also, he poured fresh aniseed oil all about the entrance, after which we returned and awoke the rest of the family, telling them that if they liked to make haste, they might see me let the pigeons fly. Everybody came to the dovecot, understanding that some ceremony was to attend the event, and I waved a wand with mock solemnity, while I muttered a seeming incantation, and then gave Fritz a sign to draw up the sliding panel. Presently, out popped the pretty heads of the captives. The soft eyes glanced about in all directions. They withdrew, they ventured forth again. They came timidly out on the veranda, as little Franz expressed it. Then, as though suddenly startled, the whole party took wing with the shrill whizzing sound peculiar to the flight of pigeons, and circling above us, they rose higher, higher, finally darting quite out of sight. While we were yet gazing after them, they reappeared and settled quietly on the dovecot. But as we congratulated ourselves on a return which showed they accepted this as a home, up sprang the 3 blue pigeons, the noble foreigners, for whom chiefly I had planned the house, and rising in circles high in air, winged their rapid way direct towards Falconhurst. Their departure had such air of determination and resolve about it that I feared them lost to us forever. Endeavoring to console ourselves by petting our 4 remaining birds, we could not forget this disappointment, and all day long the dovecot remained the center of attraction. Nothing, however, was seen of the fugitives until about the middle of next day. When most of us were hard at work inside the cavern, Jack sprang in, full of excitement, exclaiming, "He is there! He has come! He really is!" "Who? Who is there? What do you mean?" "The blue pigeon, to be sure! Hurrah! Hurrah!" "Oh, nonsense," said Ernest. "You want to play us a trick." "Why should it be nonsense?" cried I. "I fully believe we shall see them all soon." Out ran everybody to the dovecot, and there, sure enough, stood the pretty fellow. But not alone, for he was billing and cooing to a mate, a stranger of his own breed, apparently inviting her to enter his dwelling. For he popped in and out at the door, bowing, sidling, and cooing in a most irresistible manner, until the shy little lady yielded to his blandishments and tripped daintily in. "Now, let's shut the door. Pull the cord and close the panel," shouted the boys, making a rush at the string. "Stop," cried I. "Let the string alone. I won't have you frighten the little darlings. Besides, the others will be coming. Would you shut the door in their faces?" "Here they come! Here they come!" exclaimed Fritz, whose keen eye marked the birds afar, and to our delight the second blue pigeon arrived, likewise with a mate, whom, after a pretty little flirtation scene of real and assumed modesty on her part, he succeeded in leading home. The third and handsomest of the new pigeons was the last in making his appearance. Perhaps he had greater difficulty than the others in finding a mate, as distinguished in rank and beauty as himself. However, we fully expected them, and the boys talked of the arrival of Mr. and Mrs. Nicobar as a matter of course. Late in the day, Franz and his mother went out to provide for supper, but the child returned directly, exclaiming that we must hasten to the dovecot to see something beautiful. Accordingly, a general rush was made out of the cave, and we saw with delight that the third stranger also had returned with a lovely bride, and encouraged by the presence of the first arrivals, they soon made themselves at home. In a short time, nest-building commenced, and among the materials collected by the birds, I observed a long gray moss or lichen, and thought it might very possibly be the same which, in the West Indies, is gathered from the bark of old trees, where it grows and hangs in great tuft-like beards, to be used instead of horsehair for stuffing mattresses. My wife no sooner heard of it than her active brain devised 50 plans for making it of use. Would we but collect enough, She would clean and sort it, and there would be no end to the bolsters, pillows, saddles, and cushions she would stuff with it. For the discovery of nutmegs we had also to thank the pigeons, and they were carefully planted in our orchard. For some time no event of particular note occurred, until at length Jack, as usual, got into a scrape, causing thereby no little excitement at home. He went off early on one of his own particular private expeditions. He was in the habit of doing this that he might surprise us with some new acquisition on his return. This time, however, he came back in most wretched plight, covered with mud and green slime. A great bundle of Spanish canes was on his back, muddy and green like himself. He had lost a shoe, and altogether presented a ludicrous picture of misery, at which we could have laughed had he not seemed more ready to cry. "My dear boy, what has happened to you? Where have you been?" "Only in the swamp behind the powder magazine, father," replied he. "I went to get reeds for my wicker work, because I wanted to weave some baskets and hen coops, and I saw such beauties a little way off in the marsh, much finer than those close by the edge, that I tried to get at them. I jumped from one firm spot to another, till at last I slipped and sank over my ankles. I tried to get on towards the reeds which were close by, but in I went, deeper and deeper, till I was above the knees in thick, soft mud. And there I stuck. I screamed and shouted, but nobody came, and I can tell you I was in a regular fright. At last, who should appear but my faithful Fangs? He knew my voice and came close up to me, right over the swamp. But all the poor beast could do was to help me to make a row. I wonder you did not hear us. The very rocks rang, but nothing came of it, so despair drove me to think of an expedient. I cut down all the reeds I could reach round and round me, and bound them together into this bundle, which made a firm place on which to lean, while I worked and kicked about to free my feet and legs, and after much struggling I managed to get astride on the reeds. There I sat, supported above the mud and slime, while Fangs ran yelping backwards and forwards between me and the bank, seeming surprised I did not follow. Suddenly I thought of catching hold of his tail. He dragged and pulled, and I sprawled and crawled and waded, sometimes on my reeds like a raft, sometimes lugging them along with me, till we luckily got back to terra firma. But I had a near squeak for it, I can tell you." "A fortunate escape indeed, my boy," cried I, "and I thank God for it. Fangs has really acted a heroic part as your deliverer, and you have shown great presence of mind. Now go with your mother and get rid of the slimy traces of your disaster. You have brought me splendid canes, exactly what I want for a new scheme of mine." The fact was, I meant to try to construct a loom for my wife, for I knew she understood weaving. So I chose 2 fine, strong reeds, and splitting them carefully, bound them together again, that when dry they might be quite straight and equal and fit for a frame. Smaller reeds were cut into pieces and sharpened for the teeth of the comb. The boys did this for me without in the least knowing their use, and great fun they made of father's monster toothpicks. In time, all the various parts of the loom were made ready and put together, my wife knowing nothing of it, while to the incessant questions of the children I replied mysteriously, "Oh, it is an outlandish sort of musical instrument. Mother will know how to play upon it." And when the time came for presenting it, her joy was only equaled by the amusement and interest with which the children watched her movements while playing the loom, as they always said. About this time a beautiful little foal, a son of the onager, was added to our stud, and as he promised to grow up strong and tractable, we soon saw how useful he would be. The name of Swift was given to him, and he was to be trained for my own riding. The interior arrangements of the cavern being now well forward, I applied myself to contriving an aqueduct, that fresh water might be led close up to our cave, for it was a long way to go to fetch it from Jackal River, and especially inconvenient on washing days. As I wanted to do this before the rainy season began, I set about it at once. Pipes of hollow bamboo answered the purpose well, and a large cask formed the reservoir. The supply was good, and the comfort of having it close at hand so great that my wife declared she was as well pleased with our engineering as if we had made her a fountain and marble basin adorned with mermaids and dolphins. Anticipating the setting in of the rains, I pressed forward all work connected with stores for the winter, and great was the ingathering of roots, fruits, and grains, potatoes, rice, guavas, sweet acorns, pine cones. Load after load arrived at the cavern, and my wife's active needle was in constant requisition, as the demand for more sacks and bags was incessant. Casks and barrels of all sorts and sizes were pressed into the service, until at last the raft was knocked to pieces and its tubs made to do duty in the storerooms. The weather became very unsettled and stormy. Heavy clouds gathered in the horizon, and passing storms of wind, with thunder, lightning, and torrents of rain, swept over the face of nature from time to time. The sea was in frequent commotion. Heavy ground swells drove masses of water hissing and foaming against the cliffs. Everything heralded the approaching rains. All nature joined in sounding forth the solemn overture to the grandest work of the year. It was now near the beginning of the month of June, and we had 12 weeks of bad weather before us. We established some of the animals with ourselves at the salt cave. The cow, the ass, Lightfoot, Storm, and the dogs were all necessary to us, while Nips, Fangs, and the eagle were sure to be a great amusement in the long evenings. The boys would ride over to Falconhurst very often to see that all was in order there, and fetch anything required. Much remained to be done in order to give the cave a comfortable appearance, which became more desirable now that we had to live indoors. The darkness of the inner regions annoyed me, and I set myself to invent a remedy. After some thought, I called in Jack's assistance, and we got a very tall, strong bamboo which would reach right up to the vaulted roof. This we planted in the earthen floor, securing it well by driving wedges in round it. Jack ascended this pole very cleverly, taking with him a hammer and chisel to enlarge a crevice in the roof so as to fix a pulley, by means of which, when he descended, I drew up a large ship's lantern, well supplied with oil, and as there were 4 wicks, it afforded a very fair amount of light. Several days were spent in arranging the different rooms. Ernest and Franz undertook the library, fixing shelves and setting the books in order. Jack and his mother took in hand the sitting-room and kitchen, while Fritz and I, as better able for heavy work, arranged the workshops. The carpenter's bench, the turning lathe, and a large chest of tools were set in convenient places, and many tools and instruments hung on the walls. An adjoining chamber was kitted up as a forge, with fireplace, bellows, and anvil complete, all which we had found in the ship, packed together and ready to set up. When the great affairs were settled, we still found in all directions work to be done. Shelves, tables, benches, movable steps, cupboards, pegs, door handles, and bolts. There seemed no end to our requirements, and we often thought of the enormous amount of work necessary to maintain the comforts and conveniences of life, which at home we had received as matters of course. Our rocky home was greatly improved by a wide porch, which I made along the whole front of our rooms and entrances, by leveling the ground to form a terrace, and sheltering it with a veranda of bamboo, supported by pillars of the same. Ernest and Franz were highly successful as librarians. The books, when unpacked and arranged, proved to be a most valuable collection, capable of affording every sort of educational advantage. Besides a variety of books of voyages, travels, divinity, and natural history, several containing fine-colored illustrations, there were histories and scientific works, as well as standard fictions in several languages. Also, a good assortment of maps, charts, mathematical and astronomical instruments, and an excellent pair of globes. I foresaw much interesting study on discovering that we possessed the grammars and dictionaries of a great many languages, a subject for which we all had a taste. With French we were well acquainted. Fritz and Ernest had begun to learn English at school and made further progress during a visit to England. Their mother, who had once been intimate with a Dutch family, could speak that language pretty well. After a great deal of discussion, we agreed to study different languages, so that in the event of meeting with people of other nations, there should be at least one of the family able to communicate with them. All determined to improve our knowledge of German and French. The two elder boys were to study English and Dutch with their mother. Ernest, already possessing considerable knowledge of Latin, wished to continue to study it, so as to be able to make use of the many works on natural history and medicine written in that language. Jack announced that he meant to learn Spanish because it sounded so grand and imposing. I myself was interested in the Malay language, knowing it to be so widely spoken in the islands of the eastern seas, and thinking it as likely as any other to be useful to us. Our family circle by and by represented Babel in miniature, for scraps and fragments of all these tongues kept buzzing about our ears from morning to night, each sporting his newly acquired word or sentence on every possible occasion, propounding idioms and peculiar expressions like riddles to puzzle the rest. In this way, the labor of learning was very considerably lightened, and everyone came to know a few words of each language. Occasionally we amused ourselves by opening chests and packages hitherto untouched, and brought unexpected treasures to light. Mirrors, wardrobes, a pair of console tables with polished marble tops, elegant writing tables and handsome chairs, clocks of various descriptions, a musical box and a chronometer were found, and by degrees our abode was fitted up like a palace, so that sometimes we wondered at ourselves and felt as though we were strutting about in borrowed plumes. The children begged me to decide on a name for our salt cave dwelling, and that of Rockburg was chosen unanimously. The weeks of imprisonment passed so rapidly that no one found time hang heavy on his hands. Books occupied me so much that but little carpentering was done. Yet I made a yoke for the oxen, a pair of cotton-wool carders, and a spinning wheel for my wife. As the rainy season drew to a close, the weather for a while became wilder, and the storms fiercer than ever. Thunder roared, lightning blazed, torrents rushed towards the sea, which came in raging billows to meet them, lashed to fury by the tempests of wind which swept the surface of the deep. The uproar of the elements came to an end at last. Nature resumed her attitude of repose, her smiling aspect of peaceful beauty, and soon all traces of the ravages of floods and storms would disappear beneath the luxuriant vegetation of the tropics. Gladly quitting the sheltering walls of Rockburg to roam once more in the open air, we crossed Jackal River for a walk along the coast, and presently Fritz, with his sharp eyes, observed something on the small island near Flamingo Marsh, which was, he said, long and rounded, resembling a boat bottom upwards. Examining it with the telescope, I could form no other conjecture and we resolved to make it the object of an excursion next day, being delighted to resume our old habit of starting in pursuit of adventure. The boat was accordingly got in readiness. It required some repairs and fresh pitching, and then we made for the point of interest, indulging in a variety of surmises as to what we should find. It proved to be a huge, stranded whale. The island being steep and rocky, it was necessary to be careful, but we found a landing place on the further side. The boys hurried by the nearest way to the beach where lay the monster of the deep, while I clambered to the highest point of the islet, which commanded a view of the mainland from Rockburg to Falconhurst. On rejoining my sons, I found them only half-way to the great fish, and as I drew near they shouted in high glee, "Oh, father, just look at the glorious shells and coral branches we are finding! How does it happen that there are such quantities?" "Only consider how the recent storms have stirred the ocean to its depths. No doubt thousands of shellfish have been detached from their rocks and dashed in all directions by the waves, which have thrown ashore even so huge a creature as the whale yonder." "Yes, isn't he a frightful great brute?" cried Fritz. "Ever so much larger than he seemed from a distance. The worst of it is, one does not well see what use to make of the huge carcass." "Why, make train oil, to be sure," said Ernest. "I can't say he's a beauty, though, and it is much pleasanter to gather these lovely shells than to cut up blubber." "Well, let us amuse ourselves with them for the present," said I. "But in the afternoon, when the sea is calmer, we will return with the necessary implements, and see if we can turn the stranded whale to good account." We were soon ready to return to the boat, but Ernest had a fancy for remaining alone on the island till we came back, and asked my permission to do so, that he might experience, for an hour or two, the sensations of Robinson Crusoe. To this, however, I would not consent, assuring him that our fate, as a solitary family, gave him quite sufficient idea of shipwreck on an uninhabited island, and that his lively imagination must supply the rest. The boys found it hard work to row back, and began to beg of me to exert my wonderful inventive powers in contriving some kind of rowing machine. "You lazy fellows," returned I. "Give me the great clockwork out of a church tower, perhaps I might be able to relieve your labors." "Oh, father," cried Fritz, "don't you know there are iron wheels in the clockwork of the large kitchen jacks? I'm sure mother would give them up, and you could make something out of them, could you not?" "By the time I have manufactured a rowing machine out of a roasting jack, I think your arms will be pretty well inured to the use of your oars. However, I am far from despising the hint, my dear Fritz." "Is coral of any use?" demanded Jack suddenly. "In former times it was pounded and used by chemists, but it is now chiefly used for various ornaments, and made into beads, for necklaces, etc. As such, it is greatly prized by savages, and were we to fall in with natives, we might very possibly find a store of coral useful in bartering with them. For the present, we will arrange these treasures of the deep in our library, and make them the beginning of a museum of natural history, which will afford us equal pleasure and instruction." "Why, father, here we are at the landing place," exclaimed Jack. The animated recital of our adventures, the sight of the lovely shells and corals, and the proposed work for the afternoon, inspired my wife and Franz with a great wish to accompany us. To this I gladly consented, only stipulating that we should go provided with food, water, and a compass. "For," said I, "the sea has only just ceased from its raging, and being at the best of times of uncertain and capricious nature, we may chance to be detained on the island, or forced to land at a considerable distance from home." Dinner was quickly dispatched, and preparations set on foot. The more oil we could obtain, the better, for a great deal was used in the large lantern which burnt day and night in the recesses of the cave. Therefore, All available casks and barrels were pressed into the service. Many, of course, once full of pickled herrings, potted pigeons, and other winter stores, were now empty, and we took a goodly fleet of these in tow. Knives, hatchets, and the boys' climbing buskins were put on board, and we set forth, the labor of the oar being greater than ever, now that our freight was so much increased. The sea being calm, and the tide suiting better, we found it easy to land close to the whale. My first care was to place the boat, as well as the casks, in perfect security, after which we proceeded to a close inspection of our prize. Its enormous size quite startled my wife and little boy, the length being from 60 to 65 feet, and the girth between 30 and 40, while the weight could not have been less than 50,000 pounds. "And now, boys," cried I, "fasten on your buskins, and let me see if you can face the work of climbing this slippery mountain of flesh and cutting it up." Fritz and Jack stripped and went to work directly. Presently we had a multitude of unbidden guests. The air was filled by the shrill screams and hoarse croaks and cries of numbers of birds of prey. They flew around us in ever-narrowing circles, and becoming bolder as their voracity was excited by the near view of the tempting prey, they alighted close to us, snatching morsels greedily from under the very strokes of our knives and hatchets. Our work was seriously interrupted by these feathered marauders, who, after all, were no greater robbers than we ourselves. We kept them off as well as we could by blows from our tools, and several were killed, my wife taking possession of them immediately for the sake of the feathers. It was nearly time to leave the island, but first I stripped off a long piece of the skin to be used for traces, harness, and other leather work. It was about 3/4 of an inch thick, and very soft and oily, but I knew it would shrink and be tough and durable. With a heavy freight we put to sea, and made what haste we could to reach home and cleanse our persons from the unpleasant traces of the disgusting work in which we had spent the day. Next morning we started at dawn. My wife and Franz were left behind, for our proposed work was even more horrible than that of the preceding day. They could not assist, and had no inclination to witness it. It was my intention to open the carcass completely, and penetrating the interior, to obtain various portions of the intestines, thinking that it would be possible to convert the larger bones into vessels fit for holding the oil. This time we laid aside our clothes, and wore only strong canvas trousers when we commenced operations, which were vigorously carried on during the whole of the day. Then, satisfied that we could do so with a clear conscience, we abandoned the remains to the birds of prey, and with a full cargo set sail for land. On the way, it appeared to strike the boys, who had made not the slightest objection to the singularly unpleasant task I had set them, as very strange that I should wish to possess what they had been working so hard to procure for me. "What can have made you wish to bring away that brute's entrails, father? Are they of any use?" "There are countries," I replied, "where no wood grows of which to make barrels, and no hemp for thread, string, and cordage. Necessity, the mother of all the more valuable inventions, has taught the inhabitants of those countries, Greenlanders, Eskimos, and others, to think of substitutes, and they use the intestines of the whale for one purpose, the sinews and nerves for the other. We were right glad to land and get rid for the present of our unpleasant materials, the further preparation of which was work in store for the following day. A refreshing bath, clean clothes, and supper cheered us all up, and we slept in peace. Chapter 11. "Now for the finishing up of this dirty job," cried I, merrily, as we all woke up next morning at daybreak. and after the regular work was done, we commenced operations by raising a stand or rough scaffold on which the tubs full of blubber were placed and heavily pressed, so that the purest and finest oil overflowed into vessels underneath. The blubber was afterwards boiled in a cauldron over a fire kindled at some distance from our abode, and by skimming and straining through a coarse cloth, we succeeded in obtaining a large supply of excellent train oil, which, in casks and bags made of the intestines, was safely stowed away in the cellar, as the children called our roughest storeroom. This day's work was far from agreeable, and the dreadful smell oppressed us all, more especially my poor wife, who, nevertheless, endured it with her accustomed good temper, although she very urgently recommended that the new island should be the headquarters for another colony, where, said she, any animals we leave would be safe from apes and other plunderers, and where you would find it so very convenient to boil whale blubber, strain train oil, and the like. This proposal met with hearty approval, especially from the boys, who were always charmed with any new plan, and they were eager to act upon it at once. But when I reminded them of the putrefying carcass which lay there, they confessed it would be better to allow wind and storms, birds and insects to do their work in purging the atmosphere and reducing the whale to a skeleton before we revisited the island. The idea of a rowing machine kept recurring to my brain. I determined to attempt to make one. I took an iron bar, which, when laid across the middle of the boat, projected about a foot each way. I provided this bar in the middle with ribbed machinery, and at each end with a sort of nave, in which, as in a cartwheel, 4 flat spokes, or paddles, were fixed obliquely. These were intended to do the rower's part. Then the jack was arranged to act upon the machinery in the middle of the iron crossbar in such a way that one of its strong cogwheels bit firmly into the ribs, so that when it was wound up, it caused the bar to revolve rapidly, of course turning with it the paddles fixed at either end, which consequently struck the water so as to propel the boat. Although this contrivance left much to be desired in the way of improvement, still, when Fritz and I wound up the machinery and went off on a trial trip across the bay, we splashed along at such a famous rate that the shores rang with the cheers and clapping of the whole family, delighted to behold what they considered my brilliant success. Everyone wanted to go on board and take a cruise, but as it was getting late, I could not consent. A trip next day, however, was promised to Cape Disappointment and the little settlement of Prospect Hill. This proposal satisfied everybody. The evening was spent in preparing the dresses, arms, and food which would be required, and we retired early to rest. Intending to be out all day, the house was left in good order, and we departed on our expedition, provided, among other things, with spades and mattocks, for I wished to get young coconut trees and shrubs of different kinds, that, on our way back, we might land on Whale Island and begin our plantation there. We directed our course towards the opposite side of the bay. The sea was smooth, my rowing machine performed its work easily, and leaving Safety Bay and Shark Island behind us, we enjoyed at our ease the panorama of all the coast scenery. Landing near Prospect Hill, we moored the boat and walked through the woods to our little farm, obtaining some fresh coconuts as well as young plants on the way. Before coming in sight of the cottage at the farm, we heard the cocks crow, and I experienced a sudden rush of emotion as the sound recalled, in a degree painfully vivid, the recollection of many a ride and walk at home, when we would be greeted by just such familiar sounds as we approached some kind friend's house. Here, but for the unconscious animals, utter solitude and silence prevailed, and I with my dear family, whose visit would have been hailed with delight in so many homes, advanced unnoticed to this lonely cottage. So long had been our absence that our arrival created a perfect panic. The original animals had forgotten us, and to their progeny, lambs, kids, and chickens, who had never seen the face of man, we seemed an army of fierce foes. The boys found it impossible to milk the goats, until by the use of the lasso they captured them one after the other, bound their legs, then, giving them salt to lick, they soon obtained a supply of excellent milk, which was poured from the coconut shells they used into calabash flasks, so that we could take with us what was not required at dinner. The fowls were enticed by handfuls of grain and rice, and my wife caught as many as she wished for. Before returning to Whale Island, I felt a strong wish to round Cape Disappointment and survey the coast immediately beyond. But the promontory maintained the character of its name, and we found that a long sandbank, as well as hidden reefs and rocks, ran out a great way into the sea. Fritz espying breakers ahead, we put about at once, and aided by a light breeze, directed our course towards Whale Island. On landing, I began at once to plant the sugar-cane shoots we had brought. The boys assisted me for a while, but wearied somewhat of the occupation, and one after another went off in search of shells and coral, leaving their mother and me to finish the work. Presently Jack came back, shouting loudly, "Father, Mother, do come and look! There is an enormous skeleton lying here, the skeleton of some fearful great beast, a mammoth, I should think." "Why, Jack," returned I, laughing, "have you forgot our old acquaintance, the whale? What else could it be?" "Oh, no, father, it is not the whale. This thing has not fish bones, but real, good, honest, huge beast bones. I don't know what can have become of the whale. Floated out to sea, most likely. This mammoth is ever so much bigger. Come and see." As I was about to follow the boy, a voice from another direction suddenly cried, "Father! Father! A great, enormous turtle! Please make haste! It is waddling back to the sea as hard as it can go, and we can't stop it." This appeal being more pressing, as well as more important, than Jack's, I snatched up an oar and hastened to their assistance. Sure enough, a large turtle was scrambling quickly towards the water, and was within a few paces of it, although Ernest was valiantly holding on by one of its hind legs. I sprang down the bank, and making use of the oar as a lever, we succeeded with some difficulty in turning the creature on its back. It was a huge specimen, fully 8 feet long, and being now quite helpless, we left it sprawling, and went to inspect Jack's mammoth skeleton, which, of course, proved to be neither more nor less than that of the whale. I convinced him of the fact by pointing out the marks of our feet on the ground, and the broken jaws where we had hacked out the whalebone. "What can have made you take up that fancy about a mammoth, my boy?" "Ernest put it into my head, father. He said there seemed to be the skeleton of an antediluvian monster there, so I ran to look closer, and I never thought of the whale when I saw no fish bones. I suppose Ernest was joking." "What a marvelous structure it is, father," said Fritz. "What a ponderous mass of bones! Can we not make use of any of them?" "Nothing strikes me at this moment. We will leave them to bleach here yet a while, and perhaps by sawing them up afterwards make a few chairs or a reading desk for the museum. But now it is time to return home. Bring the boat round to where the turtle awaits his fate. We must settle how to deal with him." It was soon decided that he must swim. I fastened the empty water cask to a long line, one end of which was made fast to the bow of the boat, the other carefully passed round the neck and forepaws of the creature, who was then lifted so as to let him regain his feet, when he instantly made for the water, plunged in, the cask floated after him, and prevented his sinking. We were all on board in a moment, and the worthy fellow, after vainly attempting to dive, set himself diligently to swim right forwards, towing us comfortably after him. I was ready to cut the line on the least appearance of danger, and kept him on the course for Safety Bay by striking the water with a boat-hook right or left, according as the turtle was disposed to turn too much one way or the other. The boys were delighted with the fun, and compared me to Neptune in his car, drawn by dolphins, and accompanied by Amphitrite and attendant Tritons. We landed safely at the usual place, near Rockburg, and the turtle was condemned and executed soon afterwards. The shell, which was quite 8 feet long and 3 broad, was, when cleaned and prepared, to form a trough for the water supply at the cave, and the meat was carefully salted and stored up for many a good and savory meal. It had been my intention to bring a piece of land under cultivation before the next rainy season, to be sown with different sorts of grain. But many unforeseen circumstances had intervened to hinder this, and our animals, unaccustomed to the yoke, were not available for the plough. I therefore gave up the idea for the present, and applied myself, with Ernest's assistance, to completing the loom, which, although the workmanship was clumsy, I succeeded in making quite fit for use. Success encouraging me to persevere, I next began harness making. The spoils of the chase having furnished us with plenty of leather, with which I covered light frames of wood, using the hairy moss or lichen for stuffing, and ere long the animals were equipped with saddles, stirrups, bridles, yokes, and collars, to the very great satisfaction of their youthful riders and drivers. This occupation was followed by a great deal of work connected with the annual return of the herring shoals which now took place, to them succeeding, as on former occasions, shoals of other fish, and many seals. More than ever aware of the value of all of these, we did not fail to make good use of our opportunities, and captured large numbers. The boys were getting anxious for another shooting expedition, but before undertaking that, I wished to do some basket making. As sacks were beginning to fail us, and there was constant demand for baskets in which to carry and keep our roots and fruits. Our first attempts were clumsy enough, but as usual perseverance was rewarded, and we produced a good supply of all sorts and sizes. One very large basket I furnished with openings, through which to pass a strong stick, so that it might, when heavily laden, be carried by 2 persons. No sooner did the children see the force of this idea than they got a bamboo, and popping little Franz into the basket, carried him about in triumph. This amusement suggested a fresh notion to Fritz. "Oh, father," cried he, "don't you think we might make something like this for mother, and carry her much more comfortably than jolting along in the cart?" The boys shouted with glee at the proposal, and though their mother thought the plan feasible enough, she confessed that she did not much like the thought of sitting in the middle of a basket and just looking out now and then over the rim. However, I assured her it should be a well-shaped, comfortable sedan chair or litter, and the next question was how it should be carried, since the boys could not play the part of Indian palanquin bearers, either with safety to their mother or with any pleasure to themselves. "The bull and the buffalo," cried Jack. "Why not use them for it? Let's go and try them now." Off ran the boys, and in a short time the basket was securely hung between Storm and Grumble. Fritz and Jack sprang into their saddles, and Ernest very gingerly deposited himself in the cradle, as Franz called it. They set forth at a most sober pace, the animals, who were perfectly docile, appearing only a little surprised at the new arrangement. "Oh, it is so pleasant, mother! It is a delightful motion!" cried Ernest as they passed us. "It swings and rocks really soothingly. Quicker, Fritz! Go quicker!" And the trot pleasing him equally well, the pace gradually quickened, till the animals were going along at a rate which shook and jolted the basket about most fearfully. Ernest called and screamed in vain for a halt. His brothers thought it capital fun to shake up the professor, and made the circuit of the level ground near Rockburg, finally pulling up in front of us like performers stopping to receive the applause of spectators. It was impossible to help laughing. The scene was so ridiculous. But Ernest was very angry with his brothers. His reproaches provoked high words in reply, and a quarrel was imminent. But I interfered, and showed them how easily a joke carried too far would lead to disputes and bad feeling, urging them to avoid on all occasions any breach of the good fellowship and brotherly love which was the mainstay of our strength and happiness. Good humor was soon restored. Ernest himself helped to unharness the beasts, and got some handfuls of salt and barley to reward their exertions, saying that they must have some more palanquin practice another day. I was seated with my wife and Fritz beneath the shade of the veranda, engaged in wicker-work and chatting pleasantly, when suddenly Fritz got up, advanced a step or two, gazing fixedly along the avenue which led from Jackal River. Then he exclaimed, "I see something so strange in the distance, father. What in the world can it be? First it seems to be drawn in coils on the ground like a cable, then uprises as it were a little mast. Then that sinks, and the coils move along again. It is coming towards the bridge." My wife took alarm at this description, and calling the other boys, retreated into the cave, where I desired them to close up the entrances and keep watch with firearms at the upper windows. These were openings we had made in the rock at some elevation, reached within by steps, and a kind of gallery which passed along the front of the rooms. Fritz remained by me while I examined the object through my spyglass. "It is, as I feared, an enormous serpent," cried I. "It advances directly this way, and we shall be placed in the greatest possible danger, for it will cross the bridge to a certainty." "May we not attack it, father?" exclaimed the brave boy. "Only with the greatest caution," returned I. "It is far too formidable and too tenacious of life for us rashly to attempt its destruction. Thank God we are at Rockburg, where we can keep in safe retreat, while we watch for an opportunity to destroy this frightful enemy. Go up to your mother now, and assist in preparing the firearms. I will join you directly, but I must further observe the monster's movements." Fritz left me unwillingly, while I continued to watch the serpent, which was of gigantic size, and already much too near the bridge to admit of the possibility of removing that means of access to our dwelling. I recollected, too, how easily it would pass through the walls. The reptile advanced with writhing and undulatory movements, from time to time rearing its head to the height of 15 or 20 feet, and slowly turning it about, as though on the lookout for prey. As it crossed the bridge, with a slow, suspicious motion, I withdrew, and hastily rejoined my little party, which was preparing to garrison our fortress in warlike array, but with considerable trepidation, which my presence served in a measure to allay. We placed ourselves at the upper openings, after strongly barricading everything below, and, ourselves unseen, awaited with beating hearts the further advance of the foe, which speedily became visible to us. Its movements appeared to become uncertain, as though puzzled by the trace of human habitation. It turned in different directions, coiling and uncoiling, and frequently rearing its head, but keeping about the middle of the space in front of the cave, when suddenly, as though unable to resist doing so, one after another the boys fired, and even their mother discharged her gun. The shots took not the slightest effect, beyond startling the monster, whose movements were accelerated. Fritz and I also fired with steadier aim, but with the same want of success, for the monster, passing on with a gliding motion, entered the reedy marsh to the left, and entirely disappeared. A wonderful weight seemed lifted from our hearts, while all eagerly discussed the vast length and awful, though magnificent appearance of the serpent. I had recognized it as the boa constrictor. It was a vast specimen, upwards of 30 feet in length. The near neighborhood of this terrific reptile occasioned me the utmost anxiety, and I desired that no one should leave the house on any pretense whatever without my express permission. During 3 whole days we were kept in suspense and fear, not daring to stir above a few hundred steps from the door, although during all that time the enemy showed no sign of his presence. In fact, we might have been induced to think the boa had passed across the swamp and found his way by some cleft or chasm through the wall of cliffs beyond, had not the restless behavior of our geese and ducks given proof that he still lurked in the thicket of reeds which they were accustomed to make their nightly resting place. They swam anxiously about, and with much clapping of wings and disturbed cackling, showed their uneasiness. Finally, taking wing, they crossed the harbor and took up their quarters on Shark Island. My embarrassment increased as time passed on. I could not venture to attack with insufficient force a monstrous and formidable serpent concealed in dense thickets amidst dangerous swamps. Yet it was dreadful to live in a state of blockade, cut off from all the important duties in which we were engaged, and shut up with our animals in the unnatural light of the cave, enduring constant anxiety and perturbation. Out of this painful state we were at last delivered by none other than our good old simple-hearted donkey, not, however, by the exercise of a praiseworthy quality, but by sheer stupidity. Our situation was rendered the more critical from having no great stock of provisions or fodder for the animals. On the hay failing us on the evening of the 3rd day, I determined to set them at liberty by sending them, under the guidance of Fritz, across the river at the ford. He was to ride Lightfoot, and they were to be fastened together until safely over. Next morning we began to prepare for this by tying them in a line, and while so engaged my wife opened the door, when old Grizzle, who was fresh and frolicsome after the long rest and regular feeding, suddenly broke away from the halter, cut some awkward capers, then, bolting out, careered at full gallop straight for the marsh. In vain we called him by name. Fritz would even have rushed after him had I not held him back. In another moment the ass was close to the thicket, and with a cold shudder of horror we beheld the snake rear itself from its lair. The fiery eyes glanced around, the dark, deadly jaws opened widely, the forked tongue darted greedily forth. Poor Grizzle's fate was sealed. Becoming aware on a sudden of his danger, he stopped short, spread out all 4 legs, and set up the most piteous and discordant bray that ever wrung echo from rocks. Swift and straight as a fencer's thrust, the destroyer was upon him, wound round him, entangled, enfolded, compressed him, all the while cunningly avoiding the convulsive kicks of the agonized animal. A cry of horror arose from the spectators of this miserable tragedy. "Shoot him, father! Oh, shoot him! Do save poor Grizzle!" "My children, it is impossible," cried I. "Our old friend is lost to us forever." I have hopes, however, that when gorged with his prey, we may be able to attack the snake with some chance of success. "But the horrible wretch is never going to swallow him all at once, father," cried Jack. "That will be too shocking." "Snakes have no grinders, but only fangs. Therefore they cannot chew their food and must swallow it whole. But although the idea is startling, it is not really more shocking than the rending, tearing, and shedding of blood which occurs when lions and tigers seize their prey." "But," said Franz, "how can the snake separate the flesh from the bones without teeth? And is this kind of snake poisonous?" "No, dear child," said I, "only fearfully strong and ferocious, and it has no need to tear the flesh from the bones. It swallows them, skin, hair, and all, and digests everything in its stomach. It seems utterly impossible that the broad ribs, the strong legs, hoofs, and all, should go down that throat," exclaimed Fritz. "Only see," I replied, How the monster deals with his victim. Closer and more tightly he curls his crushing folds. The bones give way. He is kneading him into a shapeless mass. He will soon begin to gorge his prey, and slowly but surely it will disappear down that distended maw. My wife, with little Franz, found the scene all too horrible, and hastened into the cave, trembling and distressed. To the rest of us there seemed a fearful fascination in the dreadful sight, and we could not move from the spot. This wonderful performance lasted from 7 in the morning until noon. When the awkward morsel was entirely swallowed, the serpent lay stiff, distorted, and apparently insensible along the edge of the marsh. I felt that now or never was the moment for attack. Calling on my sons to maintain their courage and presence of mind, I left our retreat with a feeling of joyous emotion quite new to me, and approached with rapid steps and leveled gun the outstretched form of the serpent. Fritz followed me closely. Jack, somewhat timidly, came several paces behind, while Ernest, after a little hesitation, remained where he was. The monster's body was stiff and motionless, which made its rolling and fiery eyes and the slow spasmodic undulations of its tail more fearful by contrast. We fired together, and both balls entered the skull. The light of the eye was extinguished, and the only movement was in the further extremity of the body, which rolled, writhed, coiled, and lashed from side to side. Advancing closer, we fired our pistols directly into its head. A convulsive quiver ran through the mighty frame, and the boa constrictor lay dead. As we raised a cry of victory, Jack, desirous of a share in the glory of conquest, ran close to the creature, firing his pistol into its side, when he was sent sprawling over and over by a movement of its tail, excited to a last galvanic effort by the shot. Being in no way hurt, he speedily recovered his feet, and declared he had given it its quietus. "I hope the terrific noise you made just now was the signal of victory," said my wife, drawing near with the utmost circumspection, and holding Franz tightly by the hand. "I was half afraid to come, I assure you." See this dreadful creature dead at our feet, and let us thank God that we have been able to destroy such an enemy. "But what's to be done with him now?" asked Jack. "Let us get him stuffed," said Fritz, "and set him up in the museum amongst our shells and corals." "Did anybody ever think of eating serpents?" inquired Franz. "Of course not," said his mother. "Why, child, serpents are poisonous. It would be very dangerous." "Excuse me, my dear wife," said I. "First of all, the boa is not poisonous. And then, besides that, the flesh even of poisonous snakes can be eaten without danger, as, for instance, the rattlesnake, from which can be made a strong and nourishing soup, tasting very like good chicken broth. Of course, the cook must be told to throw away the head containing the deadly fangs. But come, Ernest, can you not give us an epitaph for our unfortunate friend the donkey? We must afford him more honorable sepulture than he enjoys at present, when we proceed, as we speedily must, to disembowel his murderer." Ernest took the matter quite seriously, and planting his elbows on his knees, he bent his thoughtful brow in his hands, and remained wrapped in poetic meditation for about 2 minutes. "I have it!" cried he. "But perhaps you will all laugh at me?" "No, no, don't be shy, old fellow, spit it out." And thus encouraged by his brother, Ernest, with the blush of a modest author, began. "Beneath this stone poor Grizzle's bones are laid. A faithful lass he was, and loved by all. At length his master's voice he disobeyed, and thereby came his—" melancholy fall. A monstrous serpent, springing from the grass, seized, crushed, and swallowed him before our eyes. But we, though yet we mourn our honest ass, are grateful, for he thereby saved the lives of all the human beings on this shore, a father, mother, and their children 4. Hurrah for the epitaph! Well done, Ernest! Resounded on all sides, and taking out a large red pencil I used for marking wood, the lines were forthwith inscribed on a great flat stone, being, as I told the boy, the very best poetry that had ever been written on our coast. We then had dinner, and afterwards went to work with the serpent. The first operation was to recover the mangled remains of the ass, which, being effected, he was buried in the soft, marshy ground close by, and the whole filled up with fragments of rock. Then we yoked Storm and Grumble to the serpent, and dragged it to a convenient distance from Rockburg, where the process of skinning, stuffing, and sewing up again afforded occupation of the deepest interest to the boys for several days. We took great pains to coil it round a pole in the museum, arranging the head with the jaws wide open, so as to look as alarming as possible, and contriving to make eyes and tongue which were quite sufficient to represent nature. In fact, our dogs never passed the monster without growling, and must have wondered at our taste in keeping such a pet. Over the entrance leading to the museum and library were inscribed these words: "No admittance for asses." The double meaning of this sentence pleased us all immensely.
This book is continued on Disc 8.